Hello, my name is Barbara Taylor, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Australian National University. I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm recording this presentation on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and pay my respects to elders past and present. When she is lost in the Athenian woods, the jailer's daughter in Shakespeare and Fletcher's The Two Noble Kinsmen imagines that the forest is full of wolves. She's on edge, hungry, and as she wanders deeper into the wild, she claims to have heard strange howls. Despite her call for us to hark, there is no suggestion that we hear what she hears, and she never does encounter wolves in these woods. But the jailer's daughter's imagining of them is vital enough to precipitate an absolute alteration of her frame of mind. Her fear has rendered her lost geographically as well as emotionally. She can no longer navigate the woods, and each errant step beside is torment. Without any evidence at all, she has convinced herself that the wolves howled together and fed on her love, Palamon, that he has been torn to pieces. Today, I'm going to talk about how Shakespeare imagines predators, or how we might imagine predators with Shakespeare. And I'm going to frame my short presentation through the ecological practice of rewilding, that is, the process of restoring an ecosystem so that it achieves a self-sustaining, autonomous nature. And I'd like to consider the part that fear plays in this process. My aim is to trace a line from Shakespeare to present-day imaginative and emotional investments in rewilding to see how they speak to each other. Firstly, early modern attitudes to animals were largely utilitarian, and wild predators or beasts did not feature highly in the system evaluation. In a pattern of catechistical doctrine, Bishop Lancelot Andrewes wrote that beasts have no right of society with us because they want reason, and furthermore, killing them is justified because it cannot be sin to use things to the end for which they were ordained. By Shakespeare's lifetime, wolves and bears had been all but wiped out from Britain, and wolves in particular were actively being hunted in Ireland at this time as a part of England's aggressive colonial enterprise. So de-wilding is integrated into state violence and oppression in ways that go beyond just the destruction of an environment or a single species. Contrastingly, contemporary attitudes to rewilding base their restorative approach on the pillars of the three Cs: cause, corridors, and carnivores. Modern rewilding is therefore dependent on predators being actively reintroduced into the environment. And this generates disagreement in communities because the limits of an animal population in any area is ultimately set by human tolerance. And for predators, especially large predators like bears and wolves, this tolerance is very low, understandably. Despite their physical absence in early modern England, however, Shakespeare still included encounters with predators in his plays. So we see that the stage, if not the world, is a site of imaginative and productive rewilding. And narrative depictions of human-animal encounters, as David Herman argues, can still foster new ways of imagining and responding to trans-species relationships within the larger biosphere. The narrative encounters in my examples today range from the jailer's daughter's hallucinations that I've mentioned to Antigonus's fatal exit pursued by a bear in The Winter's Tale. And they also include environmental stewardship and knowledge and knowledgeable management of predator coexistence. Taken together, these encounters diverge from romantic or pastoral idealizations of a benign wilderness towards a concept of wilderness in which human and non-human inevitably encounter each other and must do so collaboratively. As for what we do about fear, fear is, as ecologists know very well, a supremely powerful tool for the organization of a landscape. The dynamic between prey and predator animals is often described in these terms as an ecology or a landscape of fear. The landscape of fear speaks to a physical landscape, so it's about where different animals are located and when, but it's mostly a psychological landscape with its own peaks and valleys. Peaks are moments of high risk of conflict, and valleys as periods of safety. Optimal behavior in any landscape of fear is a balanced one, about knowing when to be afraid of predators, but crucially, when not to be. Yi-Fu Tuan has adopted the term to describe how fear-based organizational strategies emerge out of the almost infinite manifestations of forces for chaos as a means to try and control that chaos. So he emphasizes that fear is not a uniquely human emotion, but also that ecologies of fear, landscapes of fear, are not uniquely non-human arrangements. And fear isn't the only possible emotional response to nature. Simon Estok's ecophobia hypothesis proposes that ecophobia, a human antipathy towards physical geographies and animals, actually exists on a spectrum that can embody fear, but also contempt, indifference, or just a lack of mindfulness toward the natural environment. And on the other furthest end of the spectrum, we find the idealized biophilia, which is the innate tendency to focus on life, lifelike processes, the urge to affiliate with other forms of life, and the connections that human beings subconsciously seek with other forms of life. One of Shakespeare's more biophilic characters is the melancholic Jaques in As You Like It, and he affiliates strongly with a wounded deer he sees weeping by a brook, because it speaks to his own misery, which doth part the flux of company. After presenting a weeping deer in the scene, however, Shakespeare goes on to describe a sucked and hungry lioness in Act 4 being killed elsewhere in the same play. So biophilic identification with animals obviously has its limits, and biophilic identification with predators seems to be a bit of a harder task. In my first example of The Jailer's Daughter, the landscape of fear is one that is dominated by the mere potential of a deadly encounter. But an alternative to this dynamic may be possible to find in the wildlife encounter in The Winter's Tale that is actually deadly. When he first agrees to take the baby perdita to Bohemia, Antigonus naively imagines that there's going to be a kind of wilderness nursery for the child. Wolves and bears, they say, casting their savageness aside, have done like offices of pity. And this naive wish is circumvented when, after depositing the baby perdita on the Bohemian coast, Antigonus is chased off stage by a bear. Perhaps this is even a real live bear in the theatre appropriated by the king's men from a menagerie or from the bear pits. Although he is followed by this bear, he's actually triggered in the chase by the sounds of dogs barking and hunting horns. So to the audience, it seems like he's fleeing the sounds of humans. The shepherd also worries that these hunters have scared off two of his best sheep and that the wolf will sooner find them than the master. So we have wolves, bears, and hunting humans all impacting the dynamics of the Bohemian woods. When the clown reports his discovery of the half-eaten Antigonus, he describes how he cried to the clown for help, said his name was Antigonus, and that he was a nobleman. And we see in this description that we are in an environment where these human hierarchies of nobility and the working class are less important than knowledgeable behavior. The clown and his father can read the weather, the terrain, and the local fauna in a way that Antigonus just couldn't. In their survey of human-predator coexistence throughout time, Joanna Lambert and Joel Berger found that coexistence is facilitated by having enough experience and knowledge to mitigate fear and naivety, appropriately assess risk, and to make informed decisions that foster sharing of landscapes. Although the clown would not dare to assist Antigonus in the moment of his attack for reasonable fear for his own life, he still offers to go see if the bear be gone from the gentleman, because if there's anything left of him, he will bury it. Cautiously aware of the bear, he's nevertheless willing to cross paths with the animal because he knows that they are never cursed but when they are hungry. In these landscapes of fear, in these fatal encounters, and in these animalized conflicts, these plays represent the wild as threatening, untamable, and as a place of potential psychic degradation. And this seems very far from the biophilic ideal of fulfillment and redemption in nature. And such depictions might reinforce an ecophobic desire for correctives like culling, domestication, and domination. What we also see in these plays, however, is a wild that involves human activity and cannot be separated from it. There's an understanding that so-called natural processes that are completely absent of human impact are fundamentally an illusion, and that the landscape of fear is an ecosystem that includes us. The ecologist Mark Beckhoff has suggested that the first step in rewilding efforts should be an emotional one, to become re-enchanted with the natural world, to act from the inside out. And while Shakespeare's fearful and mortal human-animal encounters might not inspire a purely enchanted perspective in this way, they do offer a more nuanced approach to potential coexistence. And an effective or enchanted attachment to the natural world need not be one based in naivety. As Donna Haraway observed regarding working animals, predator-prey dynamics based on fear alone present an incomplete map of what might be deemed a natural order. There are shareable meanings and practices of social bonding and territory identification. The clown and the shepherd, after all, aren't unafraid, but they understand that the bear moves this way, has these sorts of habits. Their fear is not disorienting. It is, in fact, their teacher. If wolves and bears, as Antigonus believes, can cast their savageness aside, then knowledge, not naivety, is key to integrating human existence among these behaviors so that the boundaries of human toleration for predators can be broadened. For ourselves, as well as for Shakespeare's audiences, imagining predators in this way helps to engender not only a narratively heightened fear of the wild's danger for entertainment purposes, but a model of habituated coexistence and respect for our environment. In Shakespeare's imagined predators, in these examples of complex and ultimately sympathetic human-predator encounters, there is an invitation for us to adapt, for us to cast our savageness aside. Thank you very much.